Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining in across the world. I really want to thank you because you could be doing anything at this point in time, but you chose to be here. You chose to be watching this show, and we're just so delighted to have you here. I'm so privileged to have Sandeep Ghosh here today. Sandeep is an old friend and a senior colleague in the industry. He's the CEO, Group CEO for India and South Asia Visa. And thank you so much for joining us, Sandeep.
Thanks, Mudit. Delighted to be here with you, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks. So just, we have viewers from all over the world. So maybe they just like to know a little bit about you. Just share with them your journey through life, leadership, and what's brought you here today.
So that could be a very long story, but if I had to put it in a capsule, born and educated in India, grew up across numerous cities because my dad had a transferable job. Did my undergraduate studies in commerce and accountancy from Sydenham College in Mumbai, and then went on to do my MBA from IIM Ahmedabad way back in 1990. It also means that I've been now working for a little over 30 years. Over my professional career, I've kind of worked in three distinct sectors, worked in consumer products and marketing for the first 9 years with Volkswagen and PepsiCo. Spent the next 12 years as a commercial banker, working with Citi and then with RBS and ANZ. My business went through a M&A transaction. And after that, I moved to the insurance sector, worked with AXA's joint venture in India, Bharti AXA, for close to 7 years. Then I spent 4 years in consulting, leading the financial services consulting practice for EY in India. And as recently as 6 months back, I made what was yet another pretty interesting career shift, moving into the world of payments and digital when I moved to Visa as to lead their business in India and South Asia. So it's been an interesting journey in terms of life, where I worked in India and overseas over the last 30 plus years across financial services, consumer marketing, consulting. So pretty diverse sectors and diverse organizations.
Thanks. That's really amazing, Sandeep, because it just shows a lot about your caliber to be able to move from consumer banking, from consumer businesses to banking and then, consulting. So I think you bring a great deal of, experience to our viewers, and I'm sure they're looking forward to hear from you. But tell us just a little bit in your journey. Is there anything that significantly impacted you? Any turning point in your life? Was it a person, a book, an experience? Something that you feel, really impacted your life?
So I wouldn't say that there was a single moment that had a huge impact, but I think there were a series of things that kind of shaped my personality, character, if you may. Like I said, grew up in different cities across India, from Bhubaneswar in the east, small town back then, Mumbai, big city, lived in Jaipur up in the north, did my college back in Bombay, MBA in Ahmedabad. My folks were in different cities even when I wasn't living with them. But, fundamentally, I left home at the age of 16 when I came to do my undergrad studies in Mumbai, and have never kind of lived with my parents after that. So kind of leaving home at 16, I think, was an inflection point in life. The other thing was my first job after my MBA was outside of India, something which is not very uncommon these days. But back in 1990, I was probably the only B school graduate who got placed overseas in the country. And again, at 21, I left India, had never been beyond Nepal before that. So again, kind of a second inflection point was moving overseas at 21. I think, over the years, working across different geographies, different industries, kind of forced me to consistently move out of my comfort zone, to be flexible, to be adaptable, to learn about situations and problems fairly quickly and learn to deal with it. Sort of an inherent resilience that comes with a lot of change. Some of it conscious, some of it which just happens because of circumstances. I think, to put it simply, there isn't one single kind of moment out there, but series of things through my life, some planned, some unplanned, which really have kind of shaped my my personal and professional character.
Perfect. I think it's, you brought in some very, very honest truths there, because much as we'd all like to believe that, we plan everything, sometimes the universe has things, planned otherwise. So, and I think that's very natural. I think in today's, you all brought in some very interesting elements of, resilience and just being able to deal and cope with situations. Would you like to share some examples with the audience so that, they can get a closer view of how you had to, deal with situations and, be resilient and come out?
So I think probably, again, one probably has many moments in one's life where you have to deal with a complete curveball. But, there are probably two things that stand out. I mean, I remember when I first started working for Coatsweiler, which was a British company headquartered in the UK. My first posting was in Germany, and I was sent to this small town in Germany called Freiburg. There wasn't an Indian within 250 kilometers of Freiburg. There wasn't an Indian restaurant. There wasn't an Indian national. Everybody in Freiburg spoke German. There were a few students and foreigners with whom you could converse in English, but the language of work was German. The language of business, the social interactions were all in German. And much as we grew up in India learning different languages, I had no exposure to German growing up in India. So I went to a night school, studied German for 6 hours a day, outside of work hours, to be able to learn the language in 8 weeks flat. And besides learning a new language and adapting to a very different culture compared to what I'd been used to growing up in India, I also had to fend for myself. I mean, sitting in Freiburg back in 1990, in the middle of the Black Forest in Germany, it was a wonderful, beautiful setting, but I had no friends. I had to literally start life from scratch. I had no friends at work. I had no friends outside work. So I think, it just really made me reflect on how easy life was back home, how easy it was to make friends. And you kind of started to value a lot of things that you otherwise took for granted, including doing housework and things like that when you grew up in India. So I think it just made me fiercely independent. And kind of a year into my stint in Germany, I could speak the language fluently. I was driving all across Europe. I was able to deliver at work. And it just gave me enormous self-confidence that, you throw something at me and I will adapt and I will manage. So that was a great kind of, baptism to change at a very personal level. The other sort of instance that comes to mind was in 2008, at the height of the global financial crisis. I moved from Citi to Royal Bank of Scotland. And I moved from India to Hong Kong, had a young family, and it was a great role. It was an Asia Pacific wide remit. But my first day at work at RBS was the day when the bank declared itself insolvent, went in for government funding, and basically the entire business strategy, everything was up in the air. Now, I was coming off 7-8 great years at Citibank in India, where we'd kind of beaten all our targets. We'd done extremely well. And, you kind of somewhere down the line started believing that you were very, very good. And then suddenly you saw that the external environment changed on you so dramatically and so rapidly that, you just didn't have any answers for anything. You didn't know whether the company would be around the next day or the next week or the next month. And that was a very, very stressful moment, because you were not only responsible for yourself, your family, your career, but also for a large number of people who were part of your team. It also made one humble, because you realized that just how many factors in your professional life and personal life, for that matter, are just completely beyond your control. So, it's not only adversity, but it was just a very, very a difficult phase, but one went through it, and you look back in hindsight, and you came out smiling. The business found new owners, people found new jobs, and at the end of it, everything was fine. But just at that point in time, it was pretty much doom and gloom in the financial services sector, even outside of financial services. And you just at that point in time made a job change and relocated the family. So it kind of looked like, how am I going to ever get out of this? But all worked out fine in hindsight. But great learning moments. I think it just makes you more reflective, humble, to recognize just how many things need to work in your favor when you look at life and careers and so on and so forth.
Amazing. I mean, I don't think I would have survived learning German in 8 weeks flat. I might have enjoyed, like you said,
when you don't have a choice, Mudit, you will be surprised with what the human brain and human mind and human body can do.
Yes. Amazing. I mean, that's really rough, right? When you just come out, so out of B school, the sun is shining, and I think everyone believes at that time that they're all, destined to rule the world, and you get such a rude shock. But it's amazing to see how you've, adapted. And I think another story that you, related was absolutely right. Even nobody could have predicted what would have happened in 2008. I think, it was a real humbling lesson for all of us in financial services. Before that, there were years where it was all about growth, and how much you could grow, so that was the limit. And then suddenly it was all about survival. And that's, very often the way business is these days, right? I mean, it's changing so fast, etc. So what would you really advise, mid-career executives, really? How do you battle and handle this kind of change and resilience? What's the resilience that you need to have to get out?
So I think one has to be, first and foremost, mentally and physically in good shape when you're dealing with adversity, a crisis, because if you're not mentally in a good space, if you start to take everything that's happening around you personally, it can just eat into you, and there is no way you can wake up in the morning with a plan of what you can do and can't do and how do you go about it. It's equally important that you keep yourself in good physical shape, because when you're going through stress, the immediate correlation with health parameters is well known and well understood. So I think being in good mental and physical shape is absolutely important, number one. Number two, I think, again, it's not just enough to be resilient. Resilience would, to me, means that, you're able to deal with it, handle it, cope with the situation, but you also need to be flexible, adaptable, agile, because what works under normal circumstances may not work in a crisis. So resilience is important to retain sanity and clarity of thinking, but then you need to quickly pivot. You need to understand, hey, in the middle of a crisis, what if I have to find another role? What if I have to go to another geography? What if I have to change industry or sectors? What if I have to just figure out a way to survive till the storm clouds blow over? So, and how do I do that? And, in that situation, everyone's thinking on similar lines. So the ones that are most flexible, most adaptable are the ones who come out come out fine, or sometimes they even come out in better shape than when they went into the crisis. So, and we've seen that even with the pandemic. I mean, for some people, sometimes things can just go so far south that you have no control over things, and health is a classic example when your health fails. But generally speaking, you look back after a crisis, some people actually come out fitter, stronger, better, sharper. And that just goes to show that flexibility and agility. So not to undermine the importance of resilience, but resilience alone is not good enough. You then need to kind of be able to adapt and pivot. And if you do that well, you will not only survive, but you actually probably come out stronger, because a lot of others have fallen behind. So you actually, relatively speaking, have actually done better. So no formulas really, but just having that clarity of thought, good health, being able to prioritize even more, because in a crisis you certainly can't be trying to do too many things. All of that helps, and a lot of that is just intuitive, because there are no playbooks. There was no playbook to how to deal with the GFC. There was no playbook to how to deal with the COVID pandemic. So everyone's learning at that point in time. The one who learns fastest and adapts the fastest comes out the winner. But there is no formula. There's no secret recipe you can fall back on in those extreme crisis situations.
Very well said, Sandeep. But there's something, it's amazing, when you're much younger, you perhaps, because it's not your reality, a lot of people put so much more emphasis on their careers, their health somehow seems to, suffer, and it catches up. I don't know whether it's just something that we're noticing, but, a lot of executives in the recent past have, unfortunately passed on because of poor health. I mean, just a couple of names. It's not trying to be specific, but it's become more real now, because at 30, you don't think of these things, but at our age now, I'm just saying that, as you get on with years, you'll see, you big names that you see, who just, so whether it's an Anshu Jain of Deutsche Bank, whether it's Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, a lot of these people, obviously one can't predict, but what's your advice basically to executives who are really stepping on it in their careers today, especially at their much younger years? What should they be mindful of as they get on with their years?
So I think a couple of things I'd say, Mudit. The first comment I have to make is that, work-life balance may be a little bit of a cliche, and everybody will have a very different definition of work-life balance. So let's not go there, but I just think that overall balance is important. Like if you don't have the ability to shut off at some point in time from stuff that's happening at work, it's a problem, right? So, now someone may say, look, I need to work for 12 hours a day. Someone's happy working for 6 hours a day. That's a personal choice. But when you stop, you've got to stop and not have your mind still kind of racing, because that creates stress, and stress causes all kinds of ailments. It can manifest itself, in ailments of the heart. It can manifest itself in other ailments, and actually, leave aside ailments. High levels of stress also stops you from thinking clearly and taking better decisions, whether it's in your personal capacity or in a professional capacity. So the ability to switch off and be able to compartmentalize between work and life is important. How each person needs to define for himself. And I'm certainly not qualified to give advice on that, because it's very personal, my view. The other thing I would say is that, it is no secret, Mudit, that corporate lifespans have gotten shorter because of the amount of change, volatility, stress, the kind of results that people expect from leaders, no matter whether you're running a country, market, cluster, region, global, whatever. It's just, you're just answerable, every minute of the day. And if you look at average CEO tenures, you look at average CXO tenures, they've become much shorter over the years. And yes, people do get big jobs at younger ages, but then very often, after 3 to 5 years, they've moved on. So that is definitely something that has happened over the last couple of decades. People have got to the C-suite or the top job in global corporations in their early mid-40s, which was unthinkable 20 years ago. But then many of them in their 50s have burnt out or have moved on, because they haven't been able to kind of sustain at that level of intensity and performance over a long period of time. And, same analogy with sport. I mean, you see what Virat Kohli is going through today, and it's not ill health. He's fitter than any other player in the park. But, you very quickly go from being on top of your game to struggling, and that's happening in corporate life, it's happening in sports, it happens in and much shorter cycles is basically what I see. So again, I think just that aspect of being able to compartmentalize, to have a life outside of work, to have interests outside of work, to have that balance between the personal and the professional aspects of your life. So overall balance, if I had to look for one word, it's about that balance. If you have that balance, you will stay on course in the long run. The moment that balance goes a little out of whack, it manifests itself in multiple ways: poor business decisions, poor health, combination of that, which could be a lethal cocktail. So that's it. I mean, I just think balance is just so important.
Yeah. So I think the key takeaways there are shorter CXO time spans, as well as what you consider important as in terms of balance. Would you like to share with the viewers in terms of what do you do in terms of maintaining that balance? How does that help you?
So look, nobody's perfect. I can't say that I'm, perfectly balanced all the time. But I think if one is able to, like I said, compartmentalize, to be able to work very hard when I'm in office, or I'm dealing with stuff, whether at home and office, which is pertaining to work, but also being able to shut down. And I've always followed sport, played sport, socialized a lot, built networks and friendships that go way beyond work, even if they were formed at work or at school or B school or wherever. So, I mean, for me, family, friends, sports, whether playing or following, are my kind of, pressure valves. Some people are into music, singing, dancing, cooking, whatever floats your boat, but you've got to have those avenues to kind of just relax. And so that's one aspect. The second thing is I try, and I can't say that anyone's perfect in this area, is to focus on the controllables. There are times when, despite all the hard work and effort, things don't fall in place. There are times when, for no fault of your own, you find yourself in a pickle or a jam or a crisis, but just focus on the controllables, not always take every setback personally. So there are a bunch of things, one tries to do and remind oneself of. Even sometimes, when things are not going well, you sit back and you think about all the good things you've been able to do, again, personally, professionally. So you kind of bring back and revive the good memories, and that kind of helps you sometimes just deal with a very, very difficult situation. So that, look, I'm going through a tough time, but it's not that life's always been like this. And so so you kind of do a bunch of things, and a lot of this is I'm just sharing with you very intuitively. It's not that, again, I have a list of do's and don'ts. It just comes to you naturally. So the human mind, in all of us read books and all of literature around how to be better as a manager or a parent or whatever, but at the end of the day, your muscle memory is what kicks in, and that is basically how you've grown up. And I'm not saying you can't improve by reading stuff or listening to people, but 90% of the times it's actually your muscle memory in a situation that helps you either save the day and come out smiling. So I think a lot of it is intuitive, but nothing like having a bunch of avenues which work like pressure valves.
Fantastic. No, I think you brought in a very valid point about being able, there's a difference between things that you can control and things that you cannot. So what is in the locus of your control? What is your circle of influence that you can max, which is very important. So I think there's some great learning there. Just something that you mentioned, you mentioned careers are now much shorter, right? So what would you advise mid-career leaders? How can they sort of accelerate when that whole, race is becoming a lot shorter? What are the few things they need to focus on to help them get to, those higher roles of responsibility, and what is expected?
So, Mudit, I think one of the things that is increasingly becoming important in today's corporate world is self-awareness. There's no point, me getting into a boxing ring, wanting to box with Mike Tyson. I need to know, what am I good at? What are my strengths? How do I maximize my strengths? And if I do have weaknesses, it's only human. How do I ensure that those weaknesses are not so stark that they become derailers? So, capitalize on your strengths, kind of be mindful of your weaknesses. They don't just go away because, sometimes, especially when you get to my age, you are what you are. You're not going to really change fundamentally. It's good to have goals and aspirations, but focus on the controllables. That's the second key thing. It's really important that you enjoy what you do. And, it's amazing how apparent it is and how clear it is to people whether you're actually enjoying yourself or you're doing something because it's a chore and because, it's a source of livelihood. It just comes through in your body language, in the way you bring yourself to work every morning. So really important to find something which really floats your boat and enjoy what you do. Pushing the boundaries of learning, and then, kind of, at least I personally have always felt the journey, the destination, the company, all are equally important. I mean, it's not like journey is more important or destination is more important. I mean, if you just are on an endless journey and you don't get the promotion, the growth, the advancement, it's not motivating. But journey, destination, company, all equally important. So I think if you have that, again, that sort of a mantra, that sort of a balance, that sort of a perspective, then you are focusing more on the inputs. And I'm not saying not looking at goals and targets, but the outcomes then tend to follow more often than not. And they might come sometimes ahead of your expectations in terms of timing, sometimes slightly later in terms of timing. That is, again, something which is dependent on so many uncontrollables or external factors. So I think the first thing is, I've seldom found very successful people are ones who say, oh, I want to be CEO by 40, or I want to be CFO by 35. It doesn't work like that because it's so contextual. Every organization, every industry, every sector has a very different trajectory. And where you find yourself in that situation will determine what will finally be the outcome. But if you just, like I said, self-awareness, focus on controllables, enjoy what you're doing, keep pushing the boundaries of learning, focus on, some basics like, teamwork and collaboration, because those are very important these days. Not to say it wasn't important earlier, but, organizations are much more sensitive to things like inclusion, environment, so 10 years back, you didn't put as much emphasis. So you need to be mindful of the context in which you're operating. And if you do all that and you're getting better and better every day, it would be very surprising if that doesn't get recognized, rewarded, be it in terms of levels, compensation, recognition, brand, all of that. But, I think, I think that's pretty much what one would say. And it's not just about my story. I'm one of many, but when I look at, people who've been successful, you generally tend to see large degrees of, self-awareness, large degrees of people very passionate about what they do. So, whether it is stock investing or, anything else, if you're not passionate, you rarely see a person that's successful if they're not passionate. And they tend to have a very different goal orientation. And 90% of the time it works.
Fantastic. No, I think you brought in some very important things, specifically self-awareness, because, there's no point climbing a ladder to find that it's leaning against the wrong wall.
Absolutely.
And that comes with a lot of people, I see it, and I, as I coach a lot of senior people, CXOs across, very often this comes across as a challenge. They begin to question that they've gotten this far, but at what cost? So some of the things that you mentioned are, but on the other hand, when I meet, aspiring career executives who've probably done 10 years, 15 years, and, they come in. Some of the things they talk about, and I'm going to get something, bring it down to a little more mundane stuff, not the strategic 50,000 level, but now let's just come down. And they always battle, even now, they talk about a lot of politics at work. What is your advice? What's the best way to deal with, politically charged organizations? And, some are more, some are less, but what's the best way to deal with something like this?
So before I talk about politics, Mudit, let me say that, 30 years of work experience across different sectors, different geographies, it is a fact that people's progress in organizations is not just about performance and potential, but there is an element of perception, which also is there. Now, perception is a little different from politics, but if people expect that everything is linear and there is a very basic algorithm and things are going to happen because you did this, something is going to happen, it doesn't play out like that. And the fact of the matter is that there is favoritism, there is politics, there is perception, there are personas that are involved, and that's a fact of life. Now, again, there are two ways to deal with politics. One is to say that if politics is the creation of an individual or a couple of individuals, you could actually outlive them in the organization. So you kind of say, look, this is not my cup of tea. This is not how I'm going to be. I will be authentic to myself. I will do what I believe is right. And if somebody is pursuing a different tack, they may not survive forever. However, if the culture in an environment is toxic and it's really eating into a professional in a manner in which they are unable to get their best to work every day and they are not enjoying themselves, it is sometimes better to just move on, because individuals can change faster than organizations, right? So you've got to have that ability to discern that, is it a individual, a boss, a peer that is creating an issue around politics, toxic culture, etc., or is it systemic? And then you're going to decide that, how do I deal with this? But there's absolutely nothing wrong if someone says, this organization, this culture, this kind of politics is not for me, and I'm going to, the world's an open place, the choices are plenty, and why be unhappy somewhere? So, that's probably the best way to deal with it. And some other people say, look, this is a phase, and I've been in this organization very long, I've invested here, and if this phase will blow over in a year or two, then, hopefully things will change. So it's a very personal call, whether you're willing to wait it out or you're willing to move. And there's no right or wrong answer. You got to take that judgment call on that day in that situation.
Thanks, Sandeep. I think that's a very holistic answer, because one has to make the choice also, whether to play the game, to move on, and it's subjective. But you brought in a very important point about perception. That's a fact of life, because I think only in school we were told, you work hard, you'll do well, but it doesn't happen like that in work life, right? It's not linear, and a lot of this. So what is it that, mid-career individuals specifically can do about building the right perception?
So there's a bunch of things which are things that people can work on. Like, very often, like I said, again, people focus on, I was given these tasks, this is how I've completed the tasks, and therefore I should get this rating, I should get this promotion, and I should get this compensation bump, etc. So that's that very linear way of thinking. But very often people forget about things like how are they being viewed as a long-term potential or an asset for the organization that they're working for? Are they seen as an external brand ambassador of the organization that they're working for? Do they embody something special? Are they building some kind of a legacy that people will remember them for? What is their executive presence in a room full of people? If they got a 5-minute elevator ride with their global CEO, would they be able to make an impression, or would they not make an impression? So, those little things also matter. And again, not to say that that can overcome the absence of performance, or wipe out the absence of potential. But again, in a very competitive world that we live in today, there are always a cohort of people who tick all the boxes on performance and potential. But if the rest of the package is not complete, then when there is one role and there are 4 candidates, who gets the job? The person who has a few other pluses beyond just the obvious rating and track record. And as the pyramid starts to narrow, that becomes a bigger discriminator, because like I said, for every job there are probably 5 very, very capable and competent candidates. So in the early part of one's career, you focus on more the 2 P's we talked about, performance and output and all of that. But as you move up the corporate ladder, coming across as a very solid, balanced individual, doing something which is beyond the call of their daily job and their remit. Very often people come to me and say, Sandeep, these are my KRAs and this is what I've done. And I'm always reminding them that these were your KRAs, this is what you've done, and that's why you get a salary. If you want to be, treated exceptionally, then you need to talk to me about the 3 things which were way beyond your actual day job, which you've done. Have you created something which was disruptive? Have you done something exceptional? Have you made a mark in the last 12 months or 18 months? Created a legacy for yourself? Been innovative, or something? And that's what kind of will set you apart. And very often those conversations become very interesting then, because people were so focused on making sure that they did what they were being asked to do or what was on their goal sheet, that they've kind of forgotten that there's more to it than that. And look, that outperformance needn't always be on very specific organizational metrics. There are a bunch of people who do work on the CSR front, on volunteering activities, on going outside of work and also making an impact as individuals out there in society. And organizations take notice of some of that as well, because they're representing the organization and the brand in more ways than one. So it's not always about just saying, I over-delivered by 30% over my target. It's a question of how you performed on a much broader landscape than just your scorecard or your metrics. And that's sort of a big thing these days as well.
Yeah. Very, very insightful, Sandeep. I think a lot of our viewers who are, watching it across various channels can take away a lot of things which, will give them an insight, right? What do CEOs look for? So thanks so much for that. One of those points that you talked about there was executive presence. I'd just like to ask you, what is your definition and what can, executives do to build that? How do you recognize that?
So, again, I don't have like a kind of a textbook definition, but I think first and foremost, when a professional walks into the room, there is an immediate impression that they make the first time they open their mouth to speak. And some people who have terrific personalities, in fact, make an impression not even when they're speaking, even when they're silent, just from the way they look at you or they conduct themselves, or just not from the smart answers they give, but from the intelligent questions they ask. So one aspect of executive presence is just the way you're physically turned out and all of that. But there's a bigger aspect of executive presence, which is around content. And when you have a combination of presence with content, and you do that consistently day in and day out, you build a personal brand. And I'm not talking about people who are in the media every day and who do a bunch of PR to kind of promote themselves and sometimes over promote themselves. And I'm not going there at all. I'm just talking about, speaking with gravitas, being very measured and thoughtful in how they react and respond to questions or pose questions. And then, of course, just how you just bring certain amount of energy, passion, and presence, make your presence felt. And that kind of then makes it a complete package. And it's not that every CEO out there is a charismatic personality. Some people are more charismatic than others, but you would probably find 70% or 80% of the CEOs out there of global corporations have very, very strong executive presence. There could be a few people who are just so exceptionally bright that even without that, they kind of get there. But by and large, you would find that most leaders, in fact, doesn't have to be CEOs. It could be political leaders. It could be thought leaders. Do have that presence where it's kind of the impression they create the moment they walk into the room or they start speaking or the way they conduct themselves.
Very well said. I think a lot, I mean, even by all the models, it's hardly 3% of what, people actually speak, that decides perception, about who you are, what they do, and where it takes. There's so much more that's happening in terms of body language, etc., which a lot of people are not mindful. And I think you brought out some very valid points there. Now, there's also today, with social media that's sort of exploded, in a sense that it equalizes a lot of things today, because whether it's knowledge, whether it's accessibility, the world has become a lot flatter with the internet, right? So what is it that executives can do, to build on their personal brands, to be recognized? What do you think is acceptable? What is considered, things that are noticeable, and what do you notice about people?
So two things, Mudit, I'd say. First and foremost, you're absolutely right that the information asymmetry that existed 15, 20, 30 years ago is gone today with the internet. Not that everything you find on the internet or on Google is accurate, but information is no longer a secret sauce or models or frameworks or data. Everybody pretty much it's pretty democratized, let's put it that way, right? So if you look in the right places, you will find the right information, models, frameworks, etc. So first thing that sets people apart from others is the ability to actually process that, to harness that, to leverage that in your decision-making and actions, and come up with better outcomes than what the average person would do. So whether you're a leader or you're a consultant or whatever, an advisor, a coach, if you are seeing the same things that 5 other people are seeing, but you're able to take more away from that and turn that into actions that give you an advantage over others, is what defines outperformance or exceptional performance, or what differentiates truly exceptional people from average people. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is, coming back to that social aspect of it. Earlier, the people who had a view of you were only the people who knew you, met you, had interacted with you in flesh and blood and in person. But today, people who've never met you, never seen you, never shaken your hand, actually will have an impression about you, right? Because you might be tweeting, they would be looking at your LinkedIn profile, they'd be looking at your Facebook profile, they would be reading up about you. So again, as a leader, you've got to be very mindful that you are not only, influencing people who are directly working in your organization for you and your immediate stakeholders, but you have a sphere of influence that is much broader, and therefore also how you conduct yourself in the broader social and societal context has also a bearing. And you've seen, again, recently, there have been so many situations where people have done things which 10 years ago they would have gotten away with, but not today, because it just gets picked up like that, and it might even get blown out of proportion. But the question then you ask is, what on earth were you trying to do when you were, firing someone on social media or something like that, So you've got to be a lot more mindful about not just the impact, the consequences, the reach of your actions. It's tough. It's tough, but there's a price to everything. And if you do the right things, your sphere of influence is bigger. But if you make one misstep, the number of people who will be, kind of taking a negative impression away is also much larger. So it's a double-edged sword in my book.
Absolutely. So I think, you brought in two very good things or takeaways that I specifically, one is in terms of data is available to everybody, but somebody who's able to pick up actionable insights or, things that sets us apart, which, and I think, it's very good because you worked in the corporate world in terms of the normal as well as consulting. You would have picked up a lot of tricks there in that trade, which will allow a lot of viewers especially to sort of learn how to present things. So is there any takeaway that you have given us little nuggets, but as a consultant you had to do in E&Y, I'm sure you would have had to do advise people who are probably specialists in their own fields and yet bring about perspective. So what is it that managers can learn from your experience in terms of presenting, which data, insights, because I think presentations or communication have become a way of the world, right? So what is it that separates, the good people or the ones who make great presentations and impact vis-a-vis those who just do the normal stuff?
Yeah, that's a interesting and tough question, Mudit. But so let me go back to that point about self-awareness, right? Even as a consultant, it is not always necessary that you have to prove that you are better, sharper, smarter than your client or your team members. Sometimes your role is to say, I'm not telling you something new. I'm just synthesizing the information for you in a very actionable format. And I might actually go out there and help you implement and execute something you already know, but you don't have either the resources or the time or a combination thereof to get to the outcome you're seeking. So I'm just kind of facilitating that rather than I'm coming to you with some great insight which you didn't know about your business, your industry. So you've got to know that. And that's not always the case. There are times when you are sitting with somebody and you do happen to have specific insights, maybe from another geography, from another sector, which the individual out there is not fully aware of. But you've got to kind of very quickly gauge that, are you in there to make a great insightful point, or are you there to merely validate what somebody already knows? Are you there to make a great strategy, or are you there to help execute and implement? So, coming back to that point of self-awareness, you've got to very quickly gauge, what is my role in this situation? And basis that is how you craft what you're going to say. And what does that actually mean? It actually means that you need tremendous amount of preparation. And so the first thing I learned when I moved from industry to consulting is that the level of, when I was in a CEO like I am today, I could walk into a meeting saying, I will listen to everybody there and I will figure out what my course of action is. Not to say that I wouldn't read pre-reading material, but when I walk in as a consultant and somebody is paying for my time or my team's time, I needed 3x or 4x the level of preparation, both to gauge, not only to assess the problem that we were trying to deal with or the opportunity that we're going to talk about, but also to gauge the client, the situation, the context, because that often would actually determine the tone and tenor of what we were going to communicate. So I think if you combine self-awareness with preparation, and good judgment of what is it that in a particular situation you're trying to do to add value, you tend to be sort of in a good space more often than not.
No, very well said. That's from a consulting point of view. Now let's just take that back, to bring those skills back to, let's say, in your corporate world, when you have mid-career leaders presenting to you as, what is it that you want to see? Because just stacks of, you don't have time. And, so there are a lot of frameworks like the Minto principle and etc. that a lot of people, what is it today as a working, CEO, what is it that you want to see when mid-career people present to you?
So there's a whole bunch of things, Mudit. I think the first thing is that you want to see, as a CEO or as a leader, you want to see respect for your time. And similarly, if I'm presenting to my leaders, I have to be mindful and respectful of their time. So to be very, very mindful that first and foremost, how much time do I have? And in that time, what is it that I'm seeking at the end of this conversation? Is it a decision? Is it guidance? Is it sponsorship? Is it, just making someone aware of something? So be very clear about time and be very clear about objective. And I expect that of people who come to present to me, that what is it that, how much time do we have? What is it that they're trying to achieve? If there is an efficient way of giving me some good background information so we can come more quickly and directly to the opportunity or problem at hand, so much the better. And really at the end of it doesn't matter whether you get there in 2 slides or 20, if you really come to, okay, now we've talked about all this and this is where we need you to help or contribute or decide or guide, it's just helpful. And everything I'm saying, Mudit, goes back to, there's so much to be done. There are so many things that hit you every day, which are planned and unplanned, that if every conversation is very crisp, is to the agenda, and gives both the recipient, which could be me, and the participants, which could be my teams, what we were looking for when we walked into that room or into that Teams call or Zoom call, it's great. So, then everyone walks away feeling, okay, I learned something, I gained something, I got the decision I was looking for. But any meeting that leads to more meetings without an outcome is terribly unproductive for everybody. So I think, again, the pandemic, one of the few silver linings there is people have become more mindful and conscious that are we utilizing our time in the most effective manner? I just see that across the board. I mean, everyone's just much more mindful about that, which is great. And which is why if you don't need to travel and you and I can do this virtually, nothing like it, 10 years ago, if you wanted to interview me, either you would have flown to Bombay or I've come to Bangalore and we'd be doing this face to face and, whatever. But again, what is the best and most productive and responsible use of our time is something I expect of every interaction with my executives.
Fantastic. I think that's a great takeaway for a lot of people because, in the enthusiasm to show how much work they've done, the showcasing of the work happens a lot more than, the actual decision making or what you expect. So thanks so much for that. And one other thing, I know you mentioned this in a lot of ways, but I find 2 things that people have brought to my attention. One is there is a bell curve, right? So you just because you worked hard, etc., doesn't necessarily get you where, and you've talked about it. The other point is that a lot of the decisions that are taken about people are taken in their absence. So a lot of people don't know what is it that CEOs want from them. A lot of them have worked. So what are, the top 3-4 things, if you can, I know you've touched about it separately, but if you were to just synthesize that and tell middle-level managers, look, if you want to get in from a middle-level manager to a CXO, this is what you need to do.
So I think if any individual feels that they don't have clarity on what's expected of them, it is incumbent on that individual to kind of almost demand that of their leaders, bosses, superiors. And sometimes in organizations, it is very structured, very process driven, and sometimes it is not. And especially when you look at, the startup economy and, things where entire business models are shifting overnight. You could have very dynamic goal setting happening because there is moving targets and you pivoting from A to B very rapidly. But first and foremost, I think for any executive, you have to the extent possible, from a controllables perspective, own your destiny. You have to demand clarity of role and metrics and delivery, as well as feedback from time to time. Now, you have to again be a little mindful. Different leaders have different styles of giving feedback. They like to do things. Some are more structured, some are more unstructured, but checking in every now and then is advisable, because the last thing you want to do is spend 6 months or a year and then discover that you were completely operating at a tangent to what was being expected of you by an individual or a group of leaders who you are accountable to. And even you have matrix organizations, which are not entirely uncommon, especially in global organizations. It is all the more important to make sure that you've got all your stakeholders and you've got some kind of alignment as to what is being expected, demanded of you, and you do that check-in periodically to ensure that you are on track. So that's extremely important. And again, very often it's not just, people don't just leave organizations because of politics. They also leave organizations more often than not because they don't like their boss or they don't have the right equation, and they leave their leaders. They don't even leave the company, actually. So if someone finds that, look, I'm not getting clarity as to what's expected of me, I'm not getting the kind of feedback I need to grow and develop, then sometimes it's time to look for a better home where these will be in place. But like I said, you've got to be mindful that sometimes your leader himself or herself may not have that clarity, because the business models are kind of evolving and changing overnight because of the market and the environment that you operate in. And especially when you look at digital and technology and disruption that's happening, certain businesses are just going through tectonic shifts in very, very short spans of time. So the expectation of how much clarity and kind of clarity and the structure with which performance appraisal, bell curves, feedback, etc., is implemented could be very, very different from industry to sector to company maturity, where the organization is in terms of its maturity curve. So you've got to be kind of mindful of that. You can't compare, two organizations because they could be at very different maturity spectrums. But yeah, I think that's fundamental, that you've got to be at least clear about what's expected. You've got to be checking in, demanding feedback. And equally, even a mid-level manager should be living what they expect of their bosses with their team members and their peers at times. Feedback from peers is also very relevant. And some really successful executives actually not just manage up, but they manage sideways very well as well. Because when you start to rise in organizations, it's that whole ecosystem perception that is as important as just what one individual boss might think of you. So as you get more senior, managing that ecosystem, managing the peer feedback and perception is important. Some people get very singularly focused on the boss, and that's not ideal.
That's all right. Okay, thanks very much. As we get to the top of the hour, I'm just going to ask you one more thing, which is, now that you've I think all of us belong to a different era, right? So there's so many more opportunities that have emerged. Well, what would your advice be to corporate executives? Should they look at stints in startups, which are very different because they work very differently? And what is your perception? What advice would you give? in terms of building the right kind of experience to people.
I love the way you put that, Mudit. All of us belong to a different era. That's a nice way of saying you're an old man, but no offense taken. Yeah, we should. Self-awareness is also part of that is being aware of how old you are. And I did start off by saying that I've been working for the last 32 years. So every year that I continue in the corporate world is in a way a blessing. But coming back to your question, Mudit. So look, again, this whole thing about startups versus legacy organizations, it's a very personal choice because they come with very, very different dynamics, and there are some people who like the buzz, the uncertainty, like I said, changing business model or target operating model, the potential, if you really make it big, to see disproportionate financial gain if you had stock options. And there are a lot of other people who don't revel in that level of uncertainty, that level of risk, that level of maybe even working 16, 18 hours a day if that's what the startup situation warrants. So it's a very, very personal thing. And a lot of people make that mistake, Mudit, to get lured by either the potential financial upside or a better designation, because startups can be more liberal with that than a very typical legacy organization, and then they find themselves like a complete fish out of water. And then there are others who walk away from these storied companies and then they go and start something on their own, and they would never go back to the bureaucracy and the process driven kind of environment that they came out of. So it's very, very personal. The only thing I'd say is that if you kind of feel that you've made a shift that is not for you, there's no problem in kind of correcting that. Yeah. So I would certainly encourage people to say, because some things, unless you actually experience it, you don't know whether it's going to work for you or not. There's some things, sometimes you're very clear that this is just not for me. But if you are kind of caught in between, I always would encourage young people to say, okay, go out there, take a risk, give it a shot. If it works, great. If it doesn't, if you had conducted yourself with dignity and if you build good relationships, legacy organizations always like to take people back. And in EY, we used to use this term boomerang. There's a lot of people who would leave and come back. And I love that word. And after I've joined Visa, there's been a couple of boomerangs we've had, and I really like that because it gives a very strong message to the organization that someone who left with a positive impression can always come back. So no problems there. I mean, there should be no ego either on the part of the individual or the organization that I went out there, I tried something, didn't work out, want to come back. Most welcome. But there's no point playing guessing games, right? You got to carry off. If you really think you want to give that kind of startup a shot, be my guest, go do it. But sometimes people, when they leave, they say, sorry, I can't serve out my notice period because I've got to be there tomorrow morning. Now that is bad. That just shows that you're not being professional about it. But if you, like I said, if you leave with respect and dignity and without breaking any of the organization rules, 9 out of 10 times you'll be welcomed back if you want to come back. If you go out there and thrive, nothing like it. And you could still be working with your earlier organizations in different capacities now. In fintech, a bunch of our former colleagues, Mudit, I'm sure you know a whole bunch of people like that. I do too, who actually work with us because they've gone out there, started something, and they're still collaborating with the legacy banks, insurers, consulting firms or payment firms. So perfectly fine with that. So my advice, go out there, try your luck, try different things. If it doesn't work, no problem.
Great. Thanks so much, Sandeep. Thanks so much for your time. I think, I could have gone on for a long time, but time sort of, we need to sort of stop this somewhere. But, what I've really taken away, some of the great learnings is, one is self-awareness. And I really love that because, as somebody who's a mindfulness practitioner, I think that's the most fundamental thing that somebody could take away. And then you talked about so many things, about balance, about of just being mindful in terms of who you truly are, and what resonates with you. Lots of takeaways. So any final words from your side just to cap it all?
It's a Friday evening, Mudit. My only final word on a Friday evening is, whether it's in your personal life or professional life, you got to have fun along the way. If you don't, it's not worth it. So
Great.
on a lighter note, keep smiling, have fun, and that's it.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Pleasure talking to you. Pleasure catching up. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.